All right, anyway, today's episode, we're going to be discussing 3 movies that have to do with vampires. And of course, because they were Jude's picks, they are all freaking classics. 80s classics and 190s. We're talking Lost Boys. We're talking Fright Night. And we're also talking Dusk Till Dawn. Yeah. Robert Rodriguez.
Really stupid.
No, it's not, Vader.
It's almost like he's
Jude, I do need to warn you, though. I am going to shit on at least 2 out of the 3 of these movies.
I totally expected that.
Okay. All right, good. So which one? You wanted to start with Fright Night, correct?
Well, I want to start with the fact that Vader is not here, but we do have him
on a soundboard.
In our soundboard.
What's up, boo?
As though he were here.
We miss him.
Okay, so...
I hate everything.
All right, f*** off for a moment.
Stop pushing the buttons, Kate.
This is my moment. So Vader had some family obligations, so he couldn't be here with us today. But Vader loves vampires, and he was very disappointed that he couldn't be here with us today. And we are also very disappointed that
I'm very grumpy.
Jesus.
Talk about Fright Night. What's going on with Fright Night?
Fright Night?
Yeah. Tell me about Humperdink.
Humperdink.
All right, so if you guys haven't seen Fright Night, this is my first time watching 2 of these movies. Fright Night, I've never seen it. I don't even think I've heard of it.
Shocker.
So I watched it, and I was like, okay, it's pretty good. It's got, that cheesy 80s kind of horror thing going on. And then I saw the vampire, and I was like, is that Prince Humperdink?
Yeah.
Every time I see Chris Sarandon, I'm just in my head, I'm like, Humperdink.
Forever.
Humperdink.
Forever.
He'll always be Humperdink.
But he's got some 80s glam in this movie, though. My gosh.
He's so seductive.
He brought the sexy back.
There's a looker in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
That curly hair and all those little smoldering looks.
Yeah. Okay, so Fright Night, released in 1985. The budget was $9 million. It was,
that's it?
Yeah, it was directed by Tom Holland, who I think was a first-time director.
Oh, so this isn't the Spider-Man Tom Holland.
No, he wasn't born yet.
No, this is Tom Holland. He was a pretty successful screenwriter. He created the Child's Play franchise, and this was his first movie as a director.
Yeah, I think his claim to fame before directing this was just like writing
Psycho 2.
Psycho sequel?
The sequel to Psycho.
Yeah.
The Hitchcock movie?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Psycho 2 wasn't the Hitchcock movie, but it was the sequel to the Hitchcock movie that he had wrote, and it was a big hit.
Yeah, it was theatrically
But he had also written stuff
hit.
like Class of 1984 or 86 or
so he was respected as a screenwriter, but not so much as a director. So this was his directorial kind of debut. Yeah.
But he'd been like an actor before. Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Tell us what this movie's all about. Set the stage.
Basically, Charlie Brewster is the boy next door. Jerry Dandridge moves in next door to him.
To an overly creepy house.
To a very creepy house, yeah. So Jerry is the vampire. Charlie is the boy next door. Charlie is he's a fan of this
TV show.
In
local cable.
It's a local cable access.
Was this a real show in the 80s also?
No, but it's based on kind of like the USA Up All Night.
Like Vampirella.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stuff.
Yeah.
So it's called Fright Night, and he's a big fan of this movie. So he's got vampires on the brain already.
Yes.
And he starts seeing some suspicious activity from his neighbor.
Yeah. So Peter Vincent is the host of this like Friday night, we hunt vampires. I'm the great vampire killer.
Peter Cushing.
Peter Vincent.
Yeah, Peter Vincent is the character in the movie. He's kind of going off of what Peter Cushing.
It's like a amalgamation of Peter Cushing and Vincent Price.
Yeah. So Charlie has grown up on this Friday night vampire series, and he's just having a night in his room with his girlfriend Amy, and all of a sudden he sees that the next door neighbor is moving in, and he sees that like things aren't
They're
normal.
bringing a coffin in.
Yeah, things are not normal suburbs behavior. He sees some strange happenings, and he sees a coffin, and he sees a hooker get murdered, and maybe that's like kind of cuckoo crazy in the neighborhood of where they are. And finally, Charlie decides that like his neighbor is a vampire, and he's got to kill him.
And that Hijinks ensue.
Hijinks ensue.
Lots of hijinks.
Lots of hijinks. Okay, so what made you pick this movie? Because I know you said you had a ton of movies on the plate.
I
and you had to
did.
narrow it down.
I really did.
What is it about this one that separates it from the others?
So originally, I think I went from 12 to 9 to 6 to 3.
Wow.
And I don't remember what order that went in. But yeah, So
what is it about this one?
Well, I really wanted to get into the genre within the genre of
you chose all
movies.
3 of these based off of like they represent different genres within the vampire genre.
Kind of, and also, I mean, it was a little bit of both. It was a little bit of genre within the genre versus what I just like and also love. But like, I really wanted to get into the sexy vampire versus the monster vampire versus the rules of vampirism within the genre. I just want to talk about it.
Okay, cool. This is my first time watching this movie.
I assumed.
And I didn't like Amy right off the bat.
Yeah, well,
I thought
no
she
one
was-
does.
Did you recognize her?
I did not.
She was Marcy from Married with Children.
Yeah.
The next door neighbor.
Oh, I never watched that show.
I keep forgetting how young you are. like you just came out of the womb two weeks ago.
That was not a show that I watched. No, I
Great
just
show.
I didn't really like her. I didn't really buy the relationship. Obviously, he was kind of like the distracted boyfriend who he was preoccupied with sex, but also kind of just like, well, whatever. There was a disconnect there, which
Typical
I think was
teenage boy.
Yeah, it was on purpose.
Well,
and I understood it, but
I bought it. It was
bought
the 80s.
Yeah, I bought it as far as that whole thing went. But then when they kept dragging that relationship on throughout and she was chasing him and then he was chasing her back and forth, I was kind of like, do they even like each other? I don't really get it.
Well, I felt that was very respective of the time of when, in that time of the 80s, like when a woman is like, that's my boyfriend and my whole life is wrapped around my boyfriend. I just dedicate my life to whatever he says is important. And I believed in it.
The hamburger in the face.
Yeah. And
sold
she
me.
was like, when he didn't abide by the rules that she abided by. I bought that.
Like, I got what this was going for. A lot of the characters were very unlikable to me. The main character guy, what's his name? Charlie?
Uh-huh.
Kind of just generic. I didn't really think that he brought anything in particular to the role. His best friend, Evil,
Love him.
was a dirtbag.
Oh, I love Evil.
The character was actually named Evil Ed.
Yes.
Yeah, Evil Ed. And I could not stand him.
Evil
And then-
is the best.
No, he's the worst. Literally the person that I would never hang out with.
His dinner is in the oven.
It's so overacted, this entire thing. It was obnoxious. I couldn't stand it. I was happy when he went full vampire, because spoiler alert, we're going to spoil all these movies. He got turned into a vampire more towards the end.
They
of the
were
movie.
written in the 80s and released in the 80s.
Yeah.
So, if you haven't watched them,
People
since
like
then.
me who's never seen it before, spoiler alert. I was like, his acting in the second half of the movie fit more. But it was consistent. Like, he was over the top, crazy, weird, kind of eerie. Like, this dude's a freak. Like, I think I texted Cater. I'm like, I'm pretty sure Evil Ed has killed small animals in his backyard. Like, the dude's a freak. And his acting was so over the top. And then once he became a vampire, then it fit. Like, his character made sense. And I was like, okay. I felt like it was like he should have toned it down a little bit more towards the beginning. And then at the end, go the psycho crazy.
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory on that is that the character Evil Ed, the actor Stephen Jeffrey, is that his name? Okay, I don't know what his name is. I think that's close. I'll look it up later. But the actor portrayed by that was acting Evil Ed. So he was not used to playing a character that was strange, and this was like a first for him. So it took him a little amping up to get to the character of Evil Ed, and the director Evil Ed was, or the director Tom Holland was just like, I want you to think of the most outside the box character because this is really important for this character. And finally, the actor was just like, okay, I'm just going to do this really super fucking weird thing. And the director was like, yeah, do more of that. and when he like cackled that, You're so cool, Brewster. And that was like pinnacle of his character. And that's what they used as the closing credit. And then that's what they used for going for the sequel to Fright Night.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because the actor who played Evil Ed, he originally thought he was auditioning for the part of Charlie, which is the main character.
Yeah.
And he was kind of coming off of, a movie where he was the lead actor. It was like some type of like teen sex comedy or something like that. And he was like, like I'm a leading man, And so he was very insulted that they wanted him for this supporting role.
Really?
Yeah.
He wasn't insulted. He was surprised.
Well, he was kind of insulted.
He had just come off of a role like as the leading man with Amanda Bears.
So like he kind of wanted.
They just kind of
wanted to keep that train going.
Yeah,
he assumed.
Yeah, like he wanted to be the lead in the movie. Yeah. And so when he found out that you're going to be playing this quirky sidekick character, he was just kind of like, well, okay. So he was kind of trepidatious about his performance.
Yeah. Well, you can't say he phoned it in. I mean, you can see there's some effort behind it, but I just felt like it was kind of misplaced at the beginning. Well, made more sense at the end.
Funny enough, so Tom Holland, he's got like a background in theater, and you wouldn't think it because he's known for these like schlocky horror movies that he's kind of carved a niche out of for himself in. But he like had like he'd been in a couple movies himself as an actor, and so he had like this acting background. And when he finalized his cast for this movie, like he actually had the luxury of having like 2 weeks of rehearsal time with these guys. And so he had them actually write out like detailed backstories for each one of their characters, even though like you don't really see a whole lot of that in the finished film. Like these actors kind of like actually spent time doing their homework and immersing themselves in these characters and coming up with all types of interesting character traits and things that weren't in the script. And it really kind of made the characters like a lot more interesting than I think that they probably would have been had they not had the time to do this stuff. Like, Jude and I watched a 3.5 hour documentary.
God, what dedication!
This movie.
There's no way I would have done
called
that.
"You're So Cool, Brewster." If you want to check it out, it was a Kickstarted documentary, and it's very detailed on the making of this movie. But one of the more interesting things about it was Chris Sheridan, Humperdink. So like he plays the evil vampire in the movie.
Steals the show.
And his whole thing was that he wanted to play the vampire not as like pure evil. He wanted him like, okay, like he's still got these human traits to him.
Yeah, he wanted him to have depth.
Yeah, and like he came up with this interesting backstory where it's like he theorized that vampires all descended from bats. Like the first vampire was bitten by a bat at some point, and they became a vampire through that bite. And so like he's got bat DNA in him, and throughout the movie he's like eating these like apples. And I'd actually never seen this movie before either.
Really?
Yeah, this was my first time watching it.
Wow.
And when we were watching it, I kept turning to June. I was like, "Why is a vampire eating an apple?"
Yeah.
Because I'm just used to the whole like vampires can't eat like real
Human
food
thing, yeah, from Shadows.
And so Chris Sheridan,
Sarandon.
I'm sorry, Chris Sarandon, in creating this this character, he was like, he had this notion that vampires descended from bats, and 90% of bats out there are like fruit bats.
Yeah.
And so he was like, well, naturally vampires would eat fruit. And so like he came up with this concept where in between feeding on humans, he would eat apples to like cleanse his palate.
Between murders
because of the bat DNA.
Yeah. And when you're watching the movie, you don't really get it. But then when you put that perspective in, you're like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
He's cleansing his palate before he just murders another person. It's sick and a little bit sexy.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. It's some nice, put some effort into this character. I like it. Like I said, I think he stole the show. Like he made the movie for me. The other characters,
such good casting.
I feel like you could change out any of the other characters.
You know what though? Like Peter Vincent, that character, I feel like is very iconic as well. Like I feel like the three characters that really stand out in this movie are, of course, the vampire, Peter Vincent, and Evil Ed. Like those three are just like so, like kind of original.
Very unique.
Unique in their kind of creation.
Each of those actors just gave so much towards their character that wasn't written into their character.
I'm gonna retract what I said a little bit. I Charlie and his girlfriend, was it Amy?
Amy.
Okay, those two, I felt like they were kind of generic. Like you could have put anybody in those roles.
I think like they were meant to be that way, though.
Maybe it could have been.
Because I know that Tom Holland wanted Amy to be like the typical girl next door.
Yeah.
And Charlie was supposed to be like just this like kind of bland nerd type guy.
Yeah. Evil Ed was very, very unique, but he was a little bit over the top for me. I'm not saying he was a bad character. For me, I was kind of like every time he was on scene, I couldn't wait for him to get off screen.
Well, when the script was originally written, it was just Charlie and Evil Ed and Peter Vincent, and Amy wasn't even in the script. And then the director / writer went back and was like, there's no girl in this. We need to make it sexier. So we need to add Amy. So that's when Amy kind of came in. So he had to incorporate Amy in everything. Tom Holland incorporated Amy just to make it sexier.
It paid off at the end. Because the whole the damsel in distress, like she's turning into a vampire. We have to get to, save her before dawn or whatever. Like it put some extra stakes into the movie. So I kind of appreciated that. But in the beginning, I didn't really care for their relationship. I wasn't really sold on it. I wanted to see more Humperdink. Like I was like, screw the rest of these people.
We need more Humperdink in this movie.
Show me more Humperdink. He's the man I want to watch. And I
remember that time in Time Cop.
And I was super excited that they portrayed him in such a cool way when that first vampire attack comes when he's at Charlie's house, and Charlie's all like freaked out. He's got garlic around his windows and he's nailed his windows shut. And Humperdink just comes in and just like there's not a care in the world. He rips open the window. He's like, "You never invite a vampire into your house."
Humperdink
everything
was not Humperdink.
Freaking sexy
until 2 years after this movie, sir.
Yeah, he was Dandridge before he was Humperdink.
Yeah,
technically,
but technically,
funny enough,
he was Dandridge.
Like Chris Sarandon. So he was the husband of Susan Sarandon at this time.
Okay,
famous actress Susan Sarandon. And through him, she kind of got her big break. And so she started her career under his name. And after they divorced, she just kept his name.
Stage name.
Because that was like what she was known as, basically. So like he's got kind of a pedigree,
Yeah. He's good. He was good in this movie.
He was good.
Like Princess Bride is a classic, but it's very campy on purpose.
Yes.
And he plays into that campiness. And I've never seen him in any other movie. Like literally, that's the only movie I know him from is Princess Bride. When I saw him in this movie, and I was like, oh.
He has some sex appeal.
Oh, this dude's got it. Yeah.
Yeah. And like throughout, that vampires are evil, but when he has like the one-on-one with you, you're like, yeah,
I might be on your team.
maybe.
Yeah. He was like, I don't want to kill you, Charlie.
Tell me more about being a vampire.
Well, like
I like that he gave him like a ultimatum.
Well, the whole scene where he turns Evil Ed into a vampire, it's like it's actually very tender,
delicate.
It's like Ed is kind of like this outcast miscreant. Like no one at school really likes him, and once Dandridge kind of corners him, he's just like, hey, take my hand. You don't have to be scared anymore. Like I'll show you I'll show you a kind of understanding
Take
that
your hand
you've
right
never
now,
had.
Kadish.
Yeah, I'll give you the power to give you the confidence.
Yeah.
Like that's all it is this confidence that he personifies.
Like, you don't have to be afraid anymore. You don't have to worry about
I think he was the
being
good guy in
you
this movie.
anymore. Yeah.
Aside from all
It's
the
like,
murder.
Just
Just hookers.
take my hand and I will protect you and we'll be immortal forever.
So
all you have to do
just
is
wanna-
not
Hold on,
fight
she's got a
me.
thing. She's got a thing going on.
I just want to clear something up. So murder's okay as long as it's murdering hookers?
No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Don't say that.
All right, I just wanted to clear that up.
I would never murder a hooker, sir.
They're doing the Lord's work. Anyway,
Just eat an apple in between.
yeah.
So go.
Cleanse your palate.
Cleanse your palate.
So I've got
I'm gonna
some.
do that. I'm gonna obnoxiously eat an apple, and my wife's gonna be like, "What are you doing?" I'm cleansing my
Well, I
palate.
had a hooker earlier. So.
just murdered a hooker earlier. Got to cleanse the palate.
This is my family apple for you.
Anyway, what else we got about this movie?
So I got some factoids
All right, go for
to
it.
share. So Fright Night was filmed on the same Hollywood backlot as the 1989 Tom Hanks movie The Burbs.
Okay, never seen that movie either.
Well,
I am not a product of
I
the
have
70s.
feelings about that.
that was 80s.
I know, but you have to be born in the 70s to understand.
So regardless, the movie starts off like in suburbia, and that was kind of like big thing because at the time this movie was made, horror movies were kind of on the wane, like especially vampire movies. And so Tom Holland, he starts off the movie by showing like basically a suburban household.
Yeah.
But you have this voiceover where it's like this very melodramatic, like horror movie dialogue. And as the camera kind of pushes into Charlie's room, you realize that the dialogue is all on this bad TV show. And so it's kind of playing with expectations a little bit there. And I just thought that this suburb backlot set, it's kind of iconic. So like you see it in like a lot of different movies. But director Tom Holland, he was also the creator of Child's Play.
Yeah.
Which is quite a famous horror movie franchise. One of the funny things is Amanda Beer's character, Amy. So like their whole thing was like they wanted her to be very kind of sweet and innocent at the beginning. And then when she gets bitten and is transitioning into a vampire, they wanted to kind of like sex her up, make her like...
They put her in that white...
Accelerate her transformation into a quote-unquote woman.
Yeah, it starts at their kind of like dance off.
Oh, yeah. And the hypnotizing in this movie was on point.
Yeah, the thrall.
Yes.
But to kind of signify this transition, they actually made like a prosthetic breastplate for her.
They did.
that
made
enhanced her
boobs.
cleavage. so like they made her boobs like way bigger on this breastplate. So like they like...
her hair was longer too, right?
Well, that was a wig.
No, obviously. I'm just saying, like...
But they put this like kind of like fake chest on her. And, so like her boobies are a lot bigger. And she actually kept it after the movie was over.
Did she really?
She kept it for 20 years and then she auctioned it off.
Wow.
At a Comic-Con, yeah.
Hey, where's the boobs button?
Boobs.
There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Vader.
Thanks, Vader.
I'm very grumpy.
So now there's a scene in here where Evil Ed transforms into a wolf.
Yes, I thought that was very interesting because usually you get the lycans and the vampires are like more against each other. You kind of there's a myth about vampires and wolves that existed a long time ago that you don't really see in
traditional vampire lore. Vampires are shapeshifters. They're not just bats. They can shift into mist. They can shift into wolves and all this stuff. And
there's also a other lore where there's vampires who are just vampires and also humans. And then there's the lore of the vampire versus I can turn into a bat. And then there's the lore of the vampire who can turn into wolves. And then there's the lore of vampires who can turn into whatever they want. And then there's the lore of wares who can turn into other things. There's just so many different genres within the genre, which is what I kind of wanted to talk about when we got into Vampire Week, but it's just so impossible to do in 1 week.
Yeah. There's so much lore behind this.
So much.
It's so fun.
So Stephen Jeffries, it was kind of funny because when Jude and I were watching the 3.5-hour documentary on this thing,
it was very long.
Yeah,
it felt more like 5.5 hours, but
like they dedicated like a whole hour to just the special effects guys who were working on this.
Oh, the special effects were on point in this movie. Well, for a $9 million budget, it was better than freaking Monster Squad.
Well, interestingly enough,
no offense, Stan Wilson.
So this movie is the only vampire movie to spend like upwards of $1 million on effects at the time. So like they spent like a huge chunk of their budget just on vampire effects.
It paid off.
But the guys who did the vampire effects were the same special effects crew that had just worked on Ghostbusters. And so for this big budget Ghostbusters movie, these guys kind of like made all their mistakes. And so by the time they got to
it's kind of streamlined by the time they got to Fright Night.
They kind of knew what they were doing.
Nice.
And it was funny because in the documentary, they were interviewing like one of these guys who was like in charge of like creating the prosthetics and stuff. And he was like, yeah, we were just doing a lot of cocaine at the time.
Are you serious?
Yeah. Like he just flat out said like, yeah, we were doing cocaine. And like they cut to this other guy. He's like, yeah, I walked in on that guy one time and he was banging this girl right on like the prosthetics table. And the entire room smelled like formaldehyde.
Yeah. Yeah. If you've never been a cocaine user, you understand.
Okay, listeners.
Yeah. You're just like, yeah, that checks out.
But when they got to the part about Stephen Jeffries, like there's a whole scene in here where basically Stephen Jeffries transforms into a werewolf, and then he goes back to his like human form from being a werewolf. And they were kind of like these special effects guys kind of wanted to show off and do this very elaborate scene where like we see him slowly transition from his wolf form and back into, his boy form.
Yeah.
And he had to spend 18 hours in makeup. Like it was ridiculous. Like how long? Like that's over a day of work.
Yeah.
So like
they gave him a pill to help him sleep while he was
basically
in the
drugged him.
chair,
They just drugged him
so that they could
put
keep working on him. So that he could just like sleep through part of it.
Wow.
Yeah, they literally drugged him so that they could like do part of their work, and then he would wake up and just be like, okay, how much longer? And it would be like 8 hours longer. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
And like in the documentary, like he's just you can see like he's like I don't know, when was this 80, 85, 87, and it's what 2020 now, and he's just like so fucking over it. and like in the documentary, he's like, all right, fine, this is the last time I'm gonna talk about this.
Really?
And he's like, and then like at the end of the documentary, he's like, this is the last time I'm going to do this ever. He was like, ha, 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 you're so cool, Brewster. And he was like, I'm done now. I'm
So he's
done
kinda
talking about this for life.
He's kind of like
so over it. He was traumatized. He sat in a makeup chair for 18 hours a day for weeks
wow.
to do, I don't know, 30 minutes. And the contacts, they like this was the time, and this was the 80s. Like contacts were not what they are now.
Like glass and
Yeah.
shit.
And if you watch this movie and you see that their eyes, that was not digital. This was like glass contacts that these actors had to put in their eyes, and I mean glass.
Yeah.
And these actors had to put them in their eyes, and this was like shit that the arts crew had to like develop. And they're not optometrists. They like glass blue like designs onto a piece of glass and then put it in an actor's eye, and it wasn't okay. And these people had like eye problems, and there's one point in the documentary where I forget what actor it was. I think it was Evil Ed. Or no, it was Amy, and she was like, I put the contacts in, and I only had to be in them for like the one shoot, and I kept my eyes closed, and then every time I opened them, I was like, something is not okay. But I just kept going with it because the scene was important. And finally I got to the end of the scene, and she was like, yeah, there's something very wrong. And it did damage on my eyes because someone forgot to sand down the inside of the contact for it to be on my eye.
It was all bumpy and messed
Yeah,
up.
it was literally like
glass shards and
someone
stuff.
just painted the inside and forgot to sand it down. And there's no CGI in this movie. It's all just like, here, deal with this.
yeah, it's all like the 80s practical effects.
Yeah.
And
So it's like I just give so much props to the actors that were in each of these scenes that had to deal with this shit, and it's just so magical.
And it's really funny because like the prosthetic special effects guy who was doing all the cocaine, like there are lots of scenes in this where they're playing around with like melting puppets and stuff. At the end when Dandridge is basically exploding. So basically, they used a leftover puppet of the librarian from Ghostbusters as like his bat form with like the long arms and stuff, and they had this thing where they were he was basically melting, like his skin was melting off, and so in order to do that, they had to like pour this acid on the puppet thing that would melt the gelatin, and in order to like when the shot was done, in order to stop the acid, they had to like pour this like base on it to counteract it.
A neutral.
And the cocaine guy was just he was just dousing this stuff, and then like when he went home for the night, cocaine guy like his like feet were numb. He's like, what the hell's going on? He looked down, and he had gotten so much of this base kind of splashed onto his shoes that his shoes had melted off.
Yeah.
And it was just like
That's a real thing. I deal with chemicals. That's a real thing.
So like it was just
that will happen with
it was a very
cocaine, too.
unsafe working environment on this movie.
I do have to give it props for the ending scene. That ending fight scene was legit. Like it was really good, really well done, really exciting.
Yeah.
I was thrilled to watch that part, and I love the practical effects, the melting. I wanted to specifically talk about that because when I saw it, I was like, that's freaking like Raiders of the Lost Ark, like quality melting face thing. Like it was perfect. I loved it, and the bat flying around when he transformed, and then Humperdink doing his thing. And the other thing I wanted to mention was the prosthetic fingers, the Nosferatu long fingernail thing.
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah,
I
so
thought they pulled it off great. It didn't look fake at all. It looked.
Chris Sarandon had to do that himself because he was so bored sitting in the makeup chair for so long. He was like, "You guys have to give me something
he was
to
in
do."
there for like 8 hours a day.
Yeah.
So the makeup team were like, "Okay, well maybe you can just do your fingers while we work on your face." So while they were working on his face for 8 hours, Chris Sarandon did
doing
his
his own
own
hands?
fingers. Yeah, his own hands.
That's a nice little nugget.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and I mean, it's kind of funny because the whole genesis behind this movie was that writer-director Tom Holland, he kind of had this idea of the boy who cried wolf. And he was like, what if this guy knows his, next door neighbor is a vampire and nobody believes him?
Yeah.
And so he kind of had this idea, but he couldn't go anywhere with it. He's like, well, what do you do if you call the cops? Like, they're just not going to believe you. And so then like a friend of his suggested that, well, maybe he, tells a Vincent Price type TV host about it, and they team up to kill the vampires. And Tom Holland was like, that's the movie right there. And so like once he had that concept, he kind of like latched onto it, and he developed the script specifically for him to direct. And it was because that he'd had like such a bad experience with, previous movies of like scripts of his, like kind of getting, mishandled.
Yeah.
That he really wanted to, take this story and show what he could do with it. And so at the time, the studio was kind of dealing with other more important movies. And so they're like, oh, this guy wants, $9 million to make a horror movie? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
So like...
Yeah, they wanted to offer him more to not direct it. And he was like, absolutely not. I'm directing this.
Good for him.
Yeah. So basically he gets it, and one of the big casting was Chris Sarandon, sorry. Chris Sarandon as Jerry Dandridge. And it was really interesting because like Chris Sarandon originally didn't want to do it. He's like, it's a schlocky horror movie. It's like, I want to be a serious actor. I want to do this stuff.
Man.
Yeah.
Chris Sarandon was like a respected actor at the
Yeah.
time.
Like I think he'd gotten some type of award nomination.
And I think he was doing like
Theater.
Broadway. Yeah. So he
seems
was
like that
he
type
was
of
a respected actor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so originally he didn't want to do it, but he agreed to meet with Tom Holland. And when he met with Tom Holland, he was so impressed because Tom Holland said like, okay, look, I know that you think this is a schlocky horror movie, but at its core, this movie is about an older man trying to steal a younger man's woman. and when Chris Sarandon heard that, he was like, oh, I get it.
So in the documentary, so Chris Sarandon said like, I didn't want to do this, but they sent me the script and I read it because I'm a professional. So I read the scripts that are sent to me. And he said that within 10 seconds,
10 seconds?
10 seconds, he was invested in the script. He was like, I was still kind of like, oh, this is a schlocky horror movie. So,
Yeah.
but I'm like, this is a really good read.
In 10 seconds?
10 seconds, he said. So he said,
That's enough time to read the title.
right. He said, he was like, so I want to meet with the writer of this. I just want to meet with him. And he said in that meeting, Tom Holland made him see the movie. That Tom Holland is a writer that makes you not just read his words, but makes you see his view.
Yeah.
And he said in that meeting, he was just like, snap, like, I'm in, call my manager, call whoever you need to call. I'm in.
Wow.
And it was interesting because this movie was actually a very collaborative process. The actors would constantly kind of give Holland their ideas, and he'd be like, oh, those are good. So the idea that in the movie, the character of Amy looks just like one of Sheridan's lost love from like hundreds of years prior. And that was actually Chris Sheridan's idea, where he was like, what if this girl...
Please start saying his name right.
I'm trying. Me and names, I'm a face person.
Just say Humperdink.
Yeah,
Get over
Humperdink. All right. So basically, Humperdink came up with the idea that Amy was Dandridge's like kind of like reincarnated lost love, and Holland was like, "Oh, that's great, and that gives him motivation to pursue her."
He came up with the
a
backstory
painting of her in his house.
Yeah.
And he looks at it and then he sees Amy and he's like, it's you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he came up with the backstory of the Apple thing too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he wasn't, the only one who did that. Like every actor in the movie kind of contributed to the story as they were shooting. And Roddy McDowall, who played Peter Vincent in the movie, he had worked with Tom Holland previously on Class of 1986, I think it was, or 1984.
84, I think
forget.
it was. Yeah.
It's one of those two. And so originally, Tom Holland had wanted Vincent Price to play the role because he based it on Vincent Price.
Yeah.
But at the time, Price had been kind of like really heavily typecast as like, that horror movie guy, and his health was kind of in decline. And so he decided that he just wasn't taking any roles anymore. And so when he cast Roddy McDowall, everything kind of fell into place for that character, because Roddy McDowall came in and he's like, I'm going to play this like the Cowardly Lion from Wizard of Oz. And so like his performance, you can kind of see like he's just like this nervous, like,
That was one of my questions when they first meet him, when Charlie goes to see him. He says that he believes in vampires and then he is who he says he is. He's just, the TV show is just a side thing to pay bills, basically. But then later on, it kind of suggests that it was all just a farce and he's not really a vampire killer. He's just an actor. And I could never really pinpoint which one it was. Is he an actor?
Yeah, he's an actor.
Or is he an actual vampire killer who just plays a vampire killer on TV?
He's an actor who plays a vampire killer, but ultimately he's struggling for a reason to be and decides that the character that he has played is who he wants to be.
Huh. I did like the fact that Humperdink kept challenging him, like, you don't have faith in that cross of yours. That's why it doesn't work.
I love that scene
Yeah.
where he like presents the cross and he's like, "Get back, demon of hell," or whatever he says. and Chris Sarandon just like starts laughing in his face. And he's like, "You have to have faith."
Yeah.
And
That was
just
good.
challenges
That was a
him.
nice little.
I love that.
There's a couple of loopholes, like vampire loopholes, that they use in this movie. I thought was really well done.
Yeah.
Like being invited into the home changes the whole dynamic about what works and what doesn't.
So
having faith in the cross, whether that affects the vampire or not, you have to, I love that they kind of incorporated all these little minute details about vampirism in there.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about when we were doing Vampire Week, was like the different genres within the genres within the genres of vampires. Is like there's just like so many rules when it comes to vampires. There's they have to be invited in, versus that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Versus the wooden stake through the heart versus that doesn't matter. Like there's just so many like rules in the genre of vampires that I just kind of wanted to get into and talk about. And
well, we've been talking about Fright Night for about an hour, so let's go to the next movie.
Yeah, let's go on. Let's move
on to the next movie, which is Lost Boys, correct? We're doing it by year. So Lost Boys. Okay, this is another movie that I hadn't seen. So who wants to set
I'm very excited to get your first take of these movies that you haven't seen before.
Okay, cool.
So ultimately, what was your first take on Fright Night?
It was classic cheesy 80s. However, the elements that mattered were really well done.
Yeah.
Humperdink's acting, the prosthetics, the way it was shot, the way it was lit, the surprise, the loopholes, like all that stuff that matters in this movie that makes it exciting and fun was really well done. The 80s schlocky kind of comedy, boy meets girl kind of thing. Whatever. We'll leave it there. But everything else was really good.
Yeah, I felt like Fright Night was not a very good movie.
How dare you, sir?
I can appreciate it knowing like all the behind the scenes stuff that went into it, and the labor of love that the filmmakers had for this movie. Like technically, like the special effects in this movie are like freaking amazing.
They hold up
for their time.
Yeah.
The performances of particularly Humperdink were like really good, and the concepts behind it, like the whole art direction and stuff like that, was fun. And in fact, I don't know if you ever watched the remake with Anton Yelchin,
The 2011 movie?
Yeah.
No, I saw it on the list. I didn't get a chance to watch it, though.
Well, I mean, Is
it the same, or is it
No.
like a continuation?
They kind of take the premise of it, but they miss the heart of this film. And but overall, like I'd probably give the movie like 2.5 stars or something like that, just because I felt like it was a decent enough film, but it wasn't something that I was like blown away by.
Yeah, What about Jude? Final thoughts. I forgot. Matt's.
I know. It
Vader's
throws
not here.
everything off.
It throws my whole.
Well, here's what Vader thought of the movie.
The movie's stupid.
No,
No, he would like this movie.
he liked it.
Anyway, my whole my whole like dynamic for what I do for the show to keep everything on track is completely off kilter today because I don't have my fourth person. But final thoughts, Jude. We gave our final thoughts. What's your final thoughts?
I mean, this is one of my top 3 vampire picks, so obviously I give it an A+.
Yeah.
But Kadish, I think probably you have more to say because I think I've been talking for a while.
Oh no, we're done. We're done with this one.
I did have a lot more to say.
We got to move
Sure.
on.
I'm sure.
It's been an hour.
Maybe a Patreon episode of just Kadish talking.
I do all these research and I write out notes for you guys, and you're just like, I'm gonna drink, and this movie was.
I hate everything.
All right.
He was like, Vader's not going to be here. It's my time to shine.
I don't even know why I show up anymore. To tell you the truth.
Do less. Do less.
Less.